The U.S. President Donald Trump says the United States has completed what he calls a successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. The President of the United States made the announcement on the platform Truth Social, making that announcement last night, days after saying he would make a decision on whether to strike in Iran within 2 weeks. Sharon Bryce-Peace reports that Trump also used the post to announce the attack, announcing the attack to call for peace.
President Trump wrote that the United States completed a very successful attack on nuclear sites at Fordow, Natanz and Esfahan, and that all U.S. planes had left Iranian airspace after delivering a full payload of bombs on the primary site Fordow, which is built underground into a mountain. Trump congratulated what he called great American warriors, saying no other military in the world could have carried out the mission. He then wrote that now was the time for peace. This action now brings the United States directly into the war between Israel and Iran, Tehran earlier warning that it would have no option but to retaliate if the USA joined the conflict. Sharon Bryce-Peace, SABC News, New York.
Military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
All right, let's bring you an update then with SABC News correspondent Trent Murray, who joins us now from live from Tel Aviv. Trent, good afternoon. So these strikes happening overnight, and we got that confirmation from the U.S. President Donald Trump, but we've seen in the last few hours reaction from Iran. What's the word coming through from Tel Aviv? What's been the response from that side?
Well, we saw a couple of hours ago a wave of ballistic missile strikes launched by Iran towards Tel Aviv here and also Haifa, the country's 3rd largest city in the far north. Now, we are being told that over 80 people were injured in those strikes. We are seeing some scenes of fairly significant damage. Once again, homes and apartment buildings in the city are bearing the brunt of those strikes. Now, what the IDF is saying is that in response, it has launched more airstrikes of its own in western Iran. It has released some videos showing explosions at what they say was a missile launcher primed for launch towards Israel, but they were able to attack it before it could do that. And I think right now, following that wave of missile strikes, people here now are just anxiously waiting to see what comes next. I mean, we know the state of emergency remains in place here. Workplaces are closed. Schools are also closed today, being the working week in Israel is Sunday through Thursday, so it would have been back at school today, but they are closed now. The airspace is also shut. So I think right now what is happening is that the Israelis, like many in this region, are just anxiously waiting to see how the Iranians will respond to all of this. We have heard from the Iranian foreign minister in the past hour or so. He is saying that diplomacy is no longer an option after the Americans struck the nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard has said that the number, spread and size of US military bases in this region are not a strength, but rather a point of vulnerability there. I think a hint, a signal that the Iranians are at least posturing to potentially attack US troops in the Middle East. It's thought there's around 40,000 of them scattered across a number of bases, particularly those Gulf states like Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE and Qatar.
So what's been the reaction from the Benjamin Netanyahu administration? The Prime Minister spoke a bit earlier on after the strikes and thanked the United States. This is something, Trent, is it not, that the Israeli government had been pushing for, a direct involvement of the United States in bombing those facilities in Iran?
Well, the Israelis had been obviously carrying out their own attacks over the past 10 days or so, but what had been discussed at great length by military experts was the fact that they didn't possess bombs large enough, reportedly, to penetrate those deep underground facilities, particularly Fordow, which is under hundreds of meters of rock and concrete. Now, that is why we are hearing that the US got involved, because they are the ones that possess those bunker-busting munitions. Prime Minister Netanyahu here taking somewhat of a victory lap with all of this in the hours that followed. He released 2 video statements, one in Hebrew, one in English, presumably for different audiences. But he has said that history will record President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapon. It's a similar sentiment in his Hebrew announcement. We also know that the IDF says, though, that it still has objectives in Iran and they are acting all the time to obtain them. We will continue to act to achieve these objectives. So I think a signal there, a message from the Israelis that this overnight strikes by the Americans doesn't close this chapter by any means. They still have operations that they say they're going to carry out, and so I would imagine we can expect to see some more air attacks on military infrastructure across Iran in the coming hours and days.
And you mentioned some of the strikes that have happened in the last few hours, Trent. What's the sense in terms of the best approach by the Israeli Defense Force? Is it to continue to rely on those interceptors that include the Iron Dome, but also the other interceptors? Or is it that the approach that says the IDF should strengthen its response on Iranian soil to prevent the launch from site, from source in Iran is a better approach, given the number of missiles that are able to penetrate through and hit installations in parts of Israel?
Well, I think it's a combination of strategies here. I mean, the Israelis have always said that their multi-layered air defense system is not perfect, and that during large waves of missiles, there are some that can manage to slip through, which is why they are using their air force to try and find and hunt down those missile launchers across Iran in order to destroy them and to reduce Iran's ability to fire off large salvos. Now, a few days ago, the Prime Minister here announced an estimate that they believe that they had destroyed around 50% of Iran's missile launches. That was several days ago. So presumably the way that they are carrying out these continued attacks, that number is increasing. What I guess we don't know from the Iranian perspective is just how many missiles they have left. What we can say is that in the early days of this war, the waves of missiles were much larger in number. I mean, on Friday going into Saturday last week, we were talking about hundreds of missiles. Now they are smaller. They are in groups of 10 or 20. They still are causing damage, undoubtedly, and we saw those homes and apartments destroyed today, but the numbers are dwindling. And so I guess the question is that because the Israelis are diminishing Iran's ability to fire off these large waves? I guess time is just really going to tell in that. But certainly right now, they are asking people not to let complacency creep in and to make sure they have an emergency plan in place to get to their nearest bomb shelter, given that it is being heralded as a real kind of a success of Israel's home command strategy, with casualty numbers considerably lower than they anticipated when this war began, because people are able to get to their nearest safe room or public bomb shelter.
All right, Trent, I've got to thank you for that. That's Trent Murray, SABC News correspondent, live for us in Tel Aviv with that update.